And it's one of the reasons that sort of basic unit of teaching creative writing is the workshop, is because the hardest thing with your own writing is to get a handle on how it reads to others. And so it's both about discovering how it reads to the other people around the table, and it can be very surprising, both what they see that you didn't know was there and what they don't see that you thought was, very obvious. But it's also practicing the muscles of reading, what I think of as reading like a reader, by you reading other people's work. It's much easier to get an objective viewpoint on how writing works on other people's work than it is on one's own, because in some ways we're the worst readers of our own work. We know what we're trying to do. We often don't realize that we haven't done it. And particularly in historical fiction, which I'm always writing and very often also teaching, you're also dealing with what people know and don't know, and what you can assume they know and what you can assume they don't know, and how, if you think you've got some readers who will and some readers who won't, how you give the readers who won't know, I don't know, the political situation of the Low Countries in the 16th century, which people write volumes about, how you can make sure that everybody knows enough to be able to go along with the story without scratching their head or resorting to Wikipedia. Um, I mean, I think it's brilliant when people do get so intrigued by something in one's novel that they go away and look something up because they're interested. But I do think, as a writer, if someone has to go away and look something up in order to get the story at all, then basically, as the writer, you failed. And I'm probably, with students, and I'm sure with myself as well, I'm I'm just as often saying, trust the reader. They'll get as much as they need to know to understand why the character's doing such and such. Don't feel you have to explain. Just because you really enjoyed reading this history book does not mean that it should be on your pages as well. But equally, I'm saying, or particularly often, if people have a rough idea of history, it's often through a very Victorian sort of lens. And they'll assume that the attitude, for instance, towards women's sexuality in the 17th century is a kind of Victorian angel of the house view, and of course it's completely different. I mean, it's no less misogynistic, in fact, often more, but it's a completely different kind of misogyny, if you like. And you have to not only get that right in your novel, because otherwise the people who know won't believe you, and also because we all read fiction for the sting of the surprising and the new and the unexpected. So you have to get it right in the novel, but you also have to convince the people who think you've got it wrong. So I spend a lot of time, helping people and working for myself on how it's about the reader making the trust fall into the fiction. You have to make them feel, I trust you, I'm going with you. But the other thing is, we are writing a novel for readers now. I think, what, in a funny way, it's a bit, and this is not my own idea. This is actually from someone with an excellent bit of academic work, which I was reading quite recently, and I haven't cleared it with them, so I won't reference it. But it's about this question of when we're writing the past. It's a bit like translating from one language into another. If you're translating, I don't know, German for English readers, you need to know both German and English, and you can be as faithful to and literal to the German as you like, but if you want English readers to read it, it's going to have to read well in English, if you see what I mean. So as the writer of fiction, you have to keep one foot on each bank. It is like time traveling, and you have to make sense of both. And there are times when a historian is, getting very anxious, saying, yes, but they didn't talk like that. Well, no, I know they didn't talk like that, but for a start, all my people are all talking Flemish and Dutch and German and Latin and all sorts. So uh, you're already in the land of fiction. So really, getting often getting too worried about exactly what size the cartwheels were. We're always in the business of making it feel real, not being real. And obviously, drawing on the real stuff is absolutely central to that. And if a lot of your readers don't feel that it's the real stuff, then you're not doing it right. But if it is the real stuff and they're not feeling it, then you're not writing it right. You've got to feel it. And in the end, it's going to feel right for you. Hopefully, it'll feel right for the author. It's going to you hope feel right. It's going to feel right for the readers you're imagining reading it. But Dickens thought when he wrote Tale of Two Cities that he was evoking late 18th century France. To us, Tale of Two Cities sounds awfully like the rest of Dickens. They don't read like fiction written at the time they're set, and equally they don't read like fiction. Dickens is Paris and Tale of Two Cities is not Hilary Mantel's Paris in a Place of Greater Safety, though they're both great, great books. We're always writing as much for the readers of our time as we are writing. We're not writing things that anybody would mistake for a dug up manuscript from, in my case, 1560. It's not possible to do it anyway, and if you did, it wouldn't make a very good novel. Well, that's what I think anyway. But yes, one could argue it all forever. Well, the painting that really set it off wasn't. It was this Avercamp, but that one's lovely. That's this is maybe a bit complicated for the podcast, but that one that you've got, which is the one that Avercamp is referencing, if you see what I mean, saying this is where it all started. The landscape with bird trap. I mean, in the Avercamp, I'd have to find it. Hang on. In the Avercamp, he actually has a bird trap, which is that little bit thing on the right hand side with a sort of board that's about to fall down. Yes, that's the one that I saw in the Rijksmuseum. The one that really set it off, the one I had on the wall when I was a child, was it's called The Census at Bethlehem, and it is a Bruegel. Yeah, I grew up calling him Bruegel, but I'm never sure I'm right. It's a very unusual subject. There aren't very. I didn't realize this till I was reading the art history about Bruegel, and there are actually it's endless nativities, obviously, and adorations and things, but there's actually very few images of their arrival in Bethlehem, and I just adore it. And as very often with Bruegel, the central point of it, which is Mary on the donkey and Joseph leading it, they're so small in the whole village, doing its villagey thing, everybody crowding in to pay their taxes, and it's very humane. He can be very satirical, but then most of us deserve to be satirized sometimes. And when you get to know the sort of trajectory of his work, the people get bigger and bigger. They get more and more solid, and it's as if he gets more and more interested in that. And he moved away from some of the wonderful earlier pictures, which are these wonderful sort of jewel-like landscapes. He was partly trained by, he was apprenticed to a couple, Peter Cook, who was a printer, and his wife, um, who was a miniaturist, and so he's those beautiful sort of miniature landscape. Or, I mean, they're not necessarily miniature in size, so they're not huge, but extraordinary detail of sort of mountains and trees and things, and you can see that. But as his painting develops, the people get to be a larger and larger picture until you get things like the village wedding, where there's absolutely full of these swirling, stamping figures with great heft and presence. Yeah, there's one called the village wedding and one called the peasant dance. It depends. The titles vary because I think mostly we don't know what he would have called them, so they've acquired them. Well, actually, well, that's one of them, and then the other one is which is called the wedding dance. That's the one which has a very important role in the novel. Actually, it's lovely, isn't it? Well, I mean, I had a lovely time once I realised that the way to do it was to put a fictional character into Bruegel's life, and that he was going to be a model. And Bruegel reuses the same faces over and over again. You can see there was a models fair in Antwerp where you could go down and hire it, because Antwerp is one of the biggest, richest, most productive cities in Europe. It's really only rivaled by Paris and perhaps Venice. And so they have a massive art industry. But Bruegel doesn't usually go down to the models fair. He uses the same faces over and over again. So what I did was I sat down with my big book of Bruegel, which was there's a relatively recent catalogue raisonné by selling, and worked my way through and found a face that kept cropping up. And occasionally I firmly decided that this face was the same one. And so I knew which paintings Gill was important in. And of course, there are lots of Bruegel paintings which are absolutely full of little figures, and an experienced model could pop on a coat and find the right pose and present a lot of them. Or sometimes when it's kind of some of his ghastly paintings of that of hell and things like that, or people going to hell. There's an extraordinary one called Mad Griet, which is incredibly bleak, which reminds you of what he knew either by report or by experience. And quite often he'd be taking his clothes off and being a kind of body being banished to hell or something. It's called various things, Dulla Greet or Mad Greet, and Greet, I think, being a short form of Margaret or Margreta. Or it's extraordinary, isn't it? And they sort of those ones sit kind of halfway between these the people and his most kind of Hieronymus Bosch mad fantasies. Yeah, Bosch is about 100 years earlier and is as bizarre today as you could imagine. Quite extraordinary, and yeah. Oh, it's very direct. It's almost a sort of homage, except he does take them further. And again, this, I mean, it was this sort of thing too that made me think, what's going on when we look at images? Because this staring at that, people, I mean, I'm not a particular kind of horror fan, and I'm not hugely into sort of surrealism stuff, but I have friends who hugely are. And I started thinking, what's going on when someone looks at something like this and can't look away? And somehow it feels like the dark inversion of somebody looking at a religious image and wanting to, you know, be absorbed and contemplate, if you like, to be in that transcendent moment. And this, looking at this kind of thing, is I couldn't help feeling that there's the same kind of human wiring involved, even though it's sort of to a completely opposite end. And so that was why, realizing that the Beeldenstorm, the the this inferno of image smashing, which was not random vandalism, very much not. I mean, I'm sure there were people who just were having a nice time breaking things, but it's very organized. There were organized gangs of image breakers that went from church to church like a sort of wildfire. So it's not just the locals being fed up with the church seeming to have lots of money when they're hungry, though there's an element of that. I mean, actually, image smashing is the most extraordinarily complicated phenomenon, which I found completely fascinating. But then when you come back to why are we painting images, what is someone doing when they look at an image and they can't look away, and for either beautiful reasons or hideous reasons, and that became absolutely central to the novel, and these kind of strange Bosch-like paintings of Bruegel's, very much part of that thinking. And also, I mean, the thing that could be quite difficult for us to get our heads around is practically every little, vignette of people doing things and things has some kind of symbolic meaning. I mean, another of the sort of painting that lots of people love are things like he's got one called Children's Games. He's got one of Proverbs. Many, many, many of these, and there's been a lot of scholarly ink spent on it, will be saying this is a reference to a Netherlandish proverb that goes da 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 da, whatever it is. And you can unpick them that way, and it's almost impossible. It's impossible to recover that for ourselves, however much we sort of learnedly look that up. It's a bit like it's a bit like the jokes of some of Shakespeare's clowns. You can have as many footnotes as you like, but they don't really make us laugh anymore. And so I didn't feel that I could do that, and I didn't want to be reductive. I also think, talking about creativity, even though I spend most of my time doing that or thinking about it, I just didn't feel I could evoke it convincingly, which was why having someone who is very involved with him and has his own ways of thinking about this stuff. And I found it really interesting to think about what it was like what it's like to model for an artist. I never have, but I have read various things by people who do, and and I've imagined what it would be like, and and thinking about what a painting that we know would be like when you were standing inside it. One of the really important paintings in the
Yeah.
story is, it's in the Courtauld, actually, up the road from me, is Christ and the Woman Taken in Adultery, which is a little, we'd now say grisaille, which is that, all just monochrome. But at that date in English, it was often called dead color, which I find fascinating. Fascinating thing to call it. And thinking about the different people that Gill could play in that painting, and what the other people the other figures in the studio would look like from his angles, which obviously are not the same as the viewer's angles. And that was exactly because he's actually two people in this one.
Uh-huh.
He's on the left hand side. Can you see there's a man leaning in with a sort of, he's a slightly pointy hairline. Um,
Yes. Yes.
and
The
that
widow's
pointy
peak.
hairline is Gill's.
Ah,
There's a few other people where either he combs it out or he's got a hat on. But the key one is just to the
the right.
viewer's right.
Yes.
Is You can see a soldier he's got a breastplate on, and he's leaving, but he's looking back over his shoulder, and that's
Okay.
also Gill.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so it's really a bit of a detective puzzle mystery.
Yes, with the
Mm.
freedom that in a sense, I can decide what I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So he's arrived from having been away because he's been in trouble with the Inquisition, and he's had to leave Bruegel for a bit so that he won't contaminate it. But he's come back, and he finds Bruegel trying to get uh, Bruegel's wife's servant, who's called Dorothea, and she's posing for the woman, and so she's just arrived, and he's trying to get her. Get everything set up so he can start the painting. Gill turned away to look at the slew of sketches. Evidently Bruegel had had difficulty working out the right balance of figures and spread of the perspective. There was the woman, and at her left were the Pharisee judges who had condemned her to be stoned to death, and all around them a cobble of heads gazing, waiting, wanting, and Christ must stop this or she would die. So he was lunging forward to write in the sand, Die Sonde, Sonde ist die. He that is without sin, let him. Gill looked round. Am I Christ? Bruegel laughed. You of all men to say that. Gill grinned. But am I? No, we'll spare your bad knee that. You'll do for him. He waved at the left, where a prosperous-looking man who already had Gill's pointing hairline was leaning forward to peer at the letters Christ had traced. Then he pointed to the right of the woman. Much more important is this fellow. Among the gazing crowds, a man in working clothes was turning to sneak away. You're the first to realize that you're not without sin. Gill began to dig in the chest of clothes. Cap to hide the hairline? It was a close cap with small lappets of the sort which soldiers wear under a helmet. Bruegel glanced and nodded and went back to glaring at the drawing. Gill found a Fletcher's leather apron and then the back half of a breastplate. He held them up. Am I a soldier? This time Bruegel looked properly. You said I'm the first to realize I can't cast a stone. Was I charged with leading the stoning? Bruegel was silent, then nodded. Oh, Gill, I've missed you. Of course. Dorothea, could you come up onto the dais, please? There, Bruegel turned her gently until the light was on her right shoulder. You've been brought before the scribes and Pharisees, and you know there's no escape. You're going to be killed. You're looking at where Rufus is sitting. Rufus the cat got up, stretched his front legs, then back legs, and strolled off. Bruegel and Dorothea caught each other's eye and laughed. Then when she realized Gill was laughing too, she snapped into sobriety. Where Rufus was, Bruegel said, is your judge, the Pharisee, and he has just given the sentence. You are to be taken outside by the soldiers and tied to a tree in the marketplace and blindfolded, and every man in the village is to join in stoning you until you die. Hendrik, come here for a moment, would you? Hendrik left grinding the coal and let Bruegel push him down to kneel where Christ would be. Now, Dorothea, Christ steps forward, and you're startled. You swing round. She did as she was told, but it wasn't right. She tried again, still not right. Bruegel sent Hendrik back to the coal, and Dorothea tried a third time. Bruegel's voice a little sharper, though he kept his temper, and a fourth, and by Bruegel's quick sigh Gil knew that she'd still not found what he wanted, and there was small hope of better. He said only, "Right, Dorothea, don't move. Gil, come here and see it. Mynheer," Hendrik called from the workbench. "Is this fine enough?" Bruegel went over to the mortar and took the pencil to give the mixture a turn. Bruegel went over to the mortar and took the pestle to give the mixture a turn. "No, another 5 minutes, no longer. And don't you know better than to interrupt me when I'm setting the models? Now, Gil." Quietly, Gil trod over to where he should stand and let himself be clay in Bruegel's hands. "He can't cast the first stone," Bruegel said, "but while his guilt is sending him back to his wife, he can't resist looking back over his shoulder." Gil formed the thought, and the thought formed his body, and Bruegel said, "Yes, thank you," looked for his black lead, couldn't find it, went to the box where they were kept, swore, grabbed a scrap of parchment and wrapped it round another piece of black lead and went back to the panel. Silence fell. Gil breathed out and filled his mind with the Gospel according to John. "He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her." So that's what happens. And then he realizes that he's looking at Dorothea. She shares her short form. She's born Dorothea, gift of God.